Hello everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel, Homoeopathy Super Sessions by Dr. Jargos. Today we'll be doing the next chapter of Ortega's book, The HAHNEMANNIAN Theory of the Miasms. Well, this chapter focuses on the discovery in Hahnemann's clinic, suppression as cause which exacerbate the pathology, concentration on the basis of the theory of Psora, and Hahnemannian miasms as diathesis, dyscrasia, or predisposition, as presented in his fundamental works, the Organon and the chronic disease. So let us see all these points today. Dr. Hahnemann, during his days of early practice, got satisfactory results superior to those of the old school of medicine. So during the early days of Dr. Hahnemann's practice, when he discovered homeopathy, he had got much better results as compared to the results of the old school. But unfortunately, the relapses occurred in apparently cured patients. But Hahnemann found out that in spite of being cured, the relapses occurred. The predisposition, which was the background of each disease, was called by Hahnemann the miasm or the chronic disease. So the relapse was the result of the predisposition that is obtained from the family history. And that is the miasm or the chronic disease. So this predisposition was responsible for the relapse of the disease to occur, which Dr. Hahnemann called it the miasms. It is the latent germ of any pathological process. So what is miasm? According to Ortega, he said it is the latent germ of any pathological process. So for any pathological process, a germ is necessary. So this germ in homeopathy is the miasm. It is the inevitable cause of the obvious imbalance which recognizes them as the disease. So once this germ is latent, it becomes the cause and the imbalance occurs, as a result of which the disease sets in. It always involves the receptivity of the individual, that is the predisposition to them. So until and unless the individual is not receptive to the latent germ, no symptoms will arise. Or in other words, it is the susceptibility of the individual. So therefore, the receptivity of the predisposition is very important. Then only the disease will set in. Thus, acute illness is an extension of the constitutional one, which determines it, and it is the ultimate cause. So an acute illness is nothing but the extension of the constitutional one. So a chronic disease may be lurking in the background, but an acute projection or acute symptoms may be projected out, and which will determine its ultimate cause. The use of improper and noxious medicines made the present disease conditions worse and more incurable. So, according to the old school of medicine, whatever noxious medicines or whatever improper medicines they used, it made the disease condition more worse, and in fact, even to the state of incurability. The exciting causes of cold, the approach of unusual rough, damp or stormy weather, melancholy, heartbreaking event, frequent fright, deep sorrow or grief enfeebled the system. So the exciting causes, which Ortega has summarized out here, they may enfeeble the system, or they may activate the latent miasm. So these are all the exciting causes which bombard the individual, and if the individual is susceptible, then the disease will set inside. The disease sets in because of the activation of the miasm. It is caused one or more of the former ailments to appear, often accompanied with a series of new symptoms. So what happens when the exciting causes acts on the individual and it acts on the predisposition of the individual, or the receptivity to the predisposition is there, as a result of which what happens? It will cause one or more of the former ailments to appear. So any ailment will appear, and it may be accompanied by even new symptoms. It was difficult to cure. So naturally, the case will become difficult to cure. The homeopath employed again successfully remedies against these new symptoms, and the patient's condition improved for some time. So what happens when the patient comes to a homeopathic doctor? when the acute illness is there, along with the new symptoms are there because of the side effects of the allopathic of the modern medicines, or the medicines which were not used or not proved, but it was just an hearsay that this medicine was useful in such a condition. So the homeopath, he took the totality and he was successful in alleviating the new symptoms, and the patient's condition improved, but only for some time. That's very important. It improved only for momentarily or only for some time. In the case, the primitive symptoms which has been cured once already homeopathically reappear in the consequence of one of the above mentioned causes. So whatever symptoms which were cured homeopathically, it again reappeared because of the exciting causes which I just mentioned to you. The remedies which has been first employed helped again, though less perfectly and still less so on being given a third time. So the same remedy was again given for the second time, for the third time, and so on and so forth. But each time it was given, it acted less perfectly. This favorable cessation of the disease never lasted long, and the frequent return of the disease again occurred. So what happened? The disease never used to cease, or whatever good improvement took place, it occurred only for a short period of time. And again, the disease used to return. Thus, the suppressive measures made the disease more dangerous and difficult to cure. So naturally, whatever measures were used, they were suppressive in nature. Thus, it made the disease more dangerous and difficult to cure. Dangerous meaning what? It means that a disease which could be curable has now reached an incurable stage, and therefore it is difficult to cure. The acute diseases, provided they are not fatal from their beginning, were not only considerably elevated by correct chosen homeopathic remedies, but even prompt and thoroughly cured by means of the Vicks medicatrix of the organism. So the acute disease, which are generally not fatal, and the correct homeopathic medicines gave good relief to the patient, and good results were obtained, not only by the remedies, but also they were cured by the Vicks medicatrix of the organism. That is, the Vicks medicatrix is a Latin term used by Hippocrates. That is the ability of the organism to heal one's self. Then why should the Vicks medicatrix of the organism, whose subject is to restore the integrity of the organism, has been insufficient to effect a durable cure of the chronic malady? So then the question arises that if the inherent property of the individual is there through nature to cure itself, why was this insufficient to combat the disease or the chronic maladies? Even when it was aided by those homeopathic remedies, the symptoms of which corresponded most accurately to that of the disease. So what obstacles stood in the way? In trying to answer this question, I was led to the discovery of the nature of the chronic disease. I observed that the non-venereal chronic disease, after having been repeatedly and successfully removed by the then known homeopathic remedies, continually reappeared in a more or less modified form. So the non-venereal diseases, chronic diseases, which has been successfully treated, they again reappear in a more or less modified form. Modified form meaning what? It was associated with a yearly increase of disagreeable symptoms. So whatever symptoms were there originally, there were more disagreeable symptoms were added. This proved to me that the fact that the phenomena which appeared to constitute the disease was a mere fragment of a much more deep-seated primitive evil. So Ortega said that whenever this phenomena occurred, it proved that the constitutional disease was much seated, much deeper than what we saw. So what we are seeing is only the tip of the iceberg, but actually the disease still lies behind it. The great extent of which might be inferred from the new symptoms which continue to appear from time to time. So what happened? The new symptoms, they went on coming up again and again from time to time. This showed me that the homeopathic practitioner ought not to treat the disease of a kind as separate and completely developed malady. So this showed him that the homeopathic physician should not treat the disease as a separate entity, but treat it in the totality. This primitive disease evidently owed its existence to some chronic miasm. So therefore, Ortega said that the disease was there and it occurred because of some presence of some chronic miasm. For soon as it has been reached a certain height, it never yielded to the simple action of a robust constitution or to be best regulated diet or mode of life. So when the chronic miasm or when the disease has reached a certain height, even in the most robust constitution where the diet or the mode of life has been regulated, it will not help. On the contrary, it grew worse from year to year to the end of life, gradually assuming different and more dangerous symptoms. So what happened? Instead of getting better, the new symptoms went on coming up again and again, and each year the new symptoms were added and the symptoms became much more complicated or complex, and it also endangered the life. This is the case with every chronic miasmatic disease. So any disease which is miasmatic in nature, this is the sequelae of events which will take place. In the most of the patients observed, Hahnemann verified the past history of Psora. So Ortega said that Hahnemann again went through the case papers of those people in where they were so cured, but again they came back with new symptoms or even the old symptoms along with other symptoms. He found out that in the past history, there was a history of Psora. Psora, he says, is a common wellspring of many chronic disease, which may seem to differ in essence, but ultimately are one and the same. So he said that Psora is the main cause of all the chronic disease. However, its presentations may be different, but it is actually one and the same. In Europe, as well as in the other continents, we have been able to discover but 3 chronic miasms, which cause diseases manifesting themselves by local symptoms and in which most chronic ailments originate. So in Europe and in other countries, the 3 great miasms were found: Psora, syphilis, and psychosis, and they manifested by the local symptoms and they were chronic in nature. These miasms are syphilis, which I have termed also the venereal chancre, psychosis, and Psora, which forms the basis of the itch. So out here is giving you the introduction of the miasms, syphilis, psychosis, and Psora. Psora is the oldest, most universal, and most pernicious chronic miasmatic disease. So again, he reminds us that Psora is responsible for 1/7 of the non-venereal diseases, and it is the most universal and chronic miasmatic disease. Yet it has been misapprehended more than any other. So, but Psora has been misunderstood more than any other disease. For thousands of years, it had discovered and tortured mankind. So what has Psora done? For thousands of years, the mankind was plagued with different diseases and had discovered mankind and also tortured mankind. During the last century, it has become the cause of those thousands of incredibly different, acute as well as chronic, non-venereal diseases, with which the civilized portion of mankind became more and more infected upon the whole inhabited globe. So during the last century, for thousands of years, the chronic non-venereal diseases were there, which plagued mankind all over the world. That is the Psoric miasm. Psora is just as tedious as syphilis and psychosis. Ortega said that even syphilis and psychosis are responsible for the chronic disease. And just like Psora, it gives out so many symptoms. Even syphilis and psychosis also have a considerable number of symptoms. Unless it is thoroughly cured, it lasts until the breath of the longest life. So these miasms, Psora, syphilis, and psychosis, they have to be thoroughly cured. If not thoroughly cured, then it will plague mankind till he lives. Even the robust constitution, by its own unaided efforts, is able to annihilate and to extinguish Psora. So even the robust constitution, by its own unaided efforts, is able to annihilate and extinguish Psora. So if the susceptibility is good, if the constitution is robust, then without any medicine also, the robust constitution might be able to extinguish Psora. In the many thousands of years since it has visited mankind, the multitude of its morbid symptoms has increased to such an extent that its secondary symptoms have become innumerable. So what happens when the primary Psora is there, or first time the patient has Psora, naturally suppressive treatment is taken. When suppressive treatment is taken and whatever symptoms come out, it is known as the secondary symptoms of Psora. So they became much more as compared to the primary symptoms. When the chief symptom, which is the external eruption, has been suppressed, it produces an inevitable quality of the secondary chronic ailments. So this is what I just told you, that if the main complaint or the chief symptom, which is an external eruption, when suppressed by means of suppressive means, what happens? It will produce the secondary chronic ailment. So when the primary symptom, such as an external eruption, has been suppressed, what are the symptoms come up? They are nothing but the secondary chronic ailments. And the secondary disease is just as incurable as has been the original malady, with the eruption existing upon the skin. So whatever secondary disease occur, it is as incurable as compared to the primary disease. This is because false remedies were used to combat it. So why was this? Because false remedies were used, or remedies having only hypothetical evidence which was used became in fashion, as a result of which the disease never used to get cured. The miasms are characterized by 3 stages. The first stage is the moment of infection. Second, the period required for the organism to be penetrated by the sickness. And third, the manifestation of the development in the whole organism. So the 3 important stages of the miasm, Ortega said. The first one is the moment it infects the body. Second, it penetrates the body and it causes symptoms. So there's some period in which the symptoms will appear. In modern medicine, it is known as the prodromal. And then the manifestations of the development in the whole organism, that is the signs and the symptoms. A scabious exanthema reduced Psora to silence, just as an external chancre does for internal syphilis. So when the Psora is present internally, one exanthema of one scabious eruptions will be there externally. So when these eruptions are there externally, the internal turmoil will be silenced, just as the chancre or internal syphilis. When these manifestations are suppressed by unnatural techniques, changes are generated which become the internal affection. So when the local affection has been suppressed by unnatural techniques, that is by unnatural methods, that is either by cauterization or by application of ointments or use of sulfur baths and so on and so forth, what happens? They push the disease from the periphery to the deeper or to the important organs of the body. So therefore, it becomes an internal affection. It is easy to understand that Hahnemann was pointing to the innumerable suppressions undergone by this sickness, which in the case of Psora, psychosis, and syphilis. So naturally, the suppression was so much that all the miasms, Psora, syphilis, and psychosis, they were suppressed or they were internalized. Thus, the main miasm leaves its latent form and its manifestation surge to the fore with intensity when stimulated by environmental or emotional forces for its development. So, as long as the miasm is in the latent form, the individual will have good health. But because of some exciting cause, it gets triggered off and then it develops the signs and symptoms. The concept of the miasm as a contagious virus seems very appropriate to minds which accept the materialistic criteria of traditional medicine. So the concept of miasm, according to the old school, they never associated any disease to be considered because of the miasm. They said that a virus was there or a bacteria was there which was responsible for the disease. That means what? Any material cause. They failed to look into the dynamic aspect of the disease, which Hahnemann did. Such a concept is easy to understand and accept, being in agreement with the microbial theory and with the urge to find the material pecans, which once destroyed or eliminated, cause the patient's health to be restored. So such a concept of a virus will be easy to understand, and it resonates with the microbial theory. So these viruses or these you can say materialistic concept was known as the material pecans. And the old school said that once you destroy the material pecans, the health is restored. According to this, the premise medicine's fundamental objective is merely to recognize the microbes corresponding to each sickness and to destroy them. So what was the main premise of the old school of medicine? It was to recognize the material applicants or the microbes. Destroy them. Once you destroy them, the sickness will disappear. Thus, many professors of homeopathy easily concluded, seeing on Hahnemann's words about contagion, that microbes constitute what he called the acute disease and the virus the chronic miasm. So, many professors concluded, who were the followers of homeopathy, that whatever the old school constitutes as microbes, they are nothing but the miasms, which was responsible for the acute as well as the chronic diseases. But pathologically, reality must be understood differently. Yet, you cannot correlate latent Psora with scabies, just as psychosis to gonorrhea and the chancre disease to syphilis. So basically, you cannot relate the miasms to the disease entity. The exciting factors trigger off the latent Psora manifestations, which I've already told you. This varies in different individuals according to the constitution, hereditary disposition, education, habit, mode of life, diet, occupation, tendency of mind, moral, etc. So when the triggering factor activates the latent Psora, the signs and symptoms will appear. These signs and symptoms will depend upon all these factors: the constitution of the patient, the hereditary predisposition, his education, his mode of life, his diet, occupation, so on and so forth. With respect to syphilis, he states in the beginning of chronic disease, this is the case with every miasmatic disease. For instance, the venereal bubo, when it has become the syphilitic disease on account of not having been cured from within by mercury. So he's saying now regarding the syphilitic miasm that the venereal bubo is there and it is not cured from within by mercury. Syphilis never becomes extinct on itself, in spite of being the best mode of life and the robust constitution. So he said the syphilis can never be extinguished by itself, even if you have a well-regulated mode of life, and even if the person's constitution is very robust or very healthy or very strong. It increases from year to year and assumes new and more dangerous symptoms to the end of the life. So what happens? The disease increases, new symptoms are added, it becomes more dangerous or more incurable, and ultimately it will lead to the end of the life. In the last edition of Organon, there are many references to the miasms considered by Hahnemann as diathesis of constitutional diseases. We need only to refer the paragraph 78, 82, 203 to 208, especially in the paragraph 5, noting everything which may aid the curative process. So in paragraph 5 of the Organon textbook, it is the first introduction of the miasms, which Dr. Hahnemann has said. In acute cases, the exciting cause or the acute miasm. In chronic cases, the fundamental cause or the chronic miasm. He states, useful to the physician in assisting him to cure are the particulars of the most probable exciting cause of the acute disease, the most significant points in the whole story of the chronic disease to enable to discover its fundamental cause, which is generally due to chronic miasm, which I've just told you. The most illustrative and precise paragraph in Organon relating to the miasm is 204. In paragraph 206, the miasms are called dyscrasia. So there's also important another word for miasms, which is used by Hahnemann, is the dyscrasia. In the following lines, Hahnemann calls them the diatheses. The psoric diathesis, the fundamental and most common cause of the chronic disease. He also calls it the diathesis. Thus, excuse me. Thus, the concept of diathesis, dyscrasia, or Hahnemannian constitutional pathology persists in Hahnemann's brilliant concept of the chronic disease. So, whatever concept of the chronic disease was there of the miasm, there are different synonyms like the diathesis, the dyscrasia, the pathology, constitutional pathology, and so on and so forth. We have already stated that the first Hahnemannian concept needed to understand and derive all possible benefit from the miasmatic doctrine is the health, sickness, and cure are dynamic processes. So, whatever we have understood from the miasmatic doctrine, the process of health, process of sickness, process of cure, all of them will revolve around the miasm and its dynamic process. The life is also dynamic, disease is also dynamic, miasms are also dynamic. So all of them, they are in a continuous flow. Under favorable environmental influences, the latent miasms get triggered and the signs and symptoms appear. For many years, as indeed just recently, the incomparable doctrine of miasms was forgotten, underestimated, and contested because no technique has been devised to reveal its clinical usefulness. So, for many years, whatever Dr. Hahnemann had said, the doctrine of miasms, they were underestimated, and it hasn't been put to any clinical usefulness. So that's all in this chapter. The third chapter will be coming up. If you enjoyed the video, kindly give it a thumbs up. And thank you for your patient listening.